Alrighty, what is up, guys? What is up? Welcome. It's another live by Mystar. Right, showing you how to be a Mystar of your reality every single day. Alright, we're mastering our realities together, okay? Because that's all it's about, you know what I mean? You're supposed to learn, you're supposed to grow, you're supposed to evolve, you're supposed to not regress, you know what I mean? We're supposed to be expanding, contracting. And nowhere in any point did that say regression, okay? Going back, reversal, okay? None of that shit. And maybe contraction could be equivalent to some form of reversal, going within, but that's not necessarily reversal because in contracting, you're still going within, and therefore you are still doing some form of growth, of transformation. Okay, so either way, which way you look at it, it's going to be some form of expansion and contraction. Okay, so before we get into this video, I just want to say, I hope you're having a freaking amazing time wherever you are. And if you are not having an amazing time, remember that you are the creator of your fucking reality, bitch. Okay, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be flipping the switch on yourself and shifting your emotional and mental state of being. All right. If you feel like, oh, you know what? Today is not the best day. I'm not going so great, all right? Apologies for the lights here, guys. As you can tell, my camera is a little bit fucked. We got a crack through the camera, okay? But I think it gives a cool effect. It gives a cool vibe. So we're just gonna stick with it. We're just gonna stick with it. So remember that you can switch your perspective. You can switch your emotional and mental state of being at any point that you choose, okay? Do not stay stuck in that energy, all right? Get yourself moving. Maybe you've been sitting around too long and that's why you end up being in stuck energy, stuck in emotion, stuck in thought, all right? But if you start moving, get the blood flowing, get the blood pumping, all of that kind of stuff, then you'll be able to get a lot more nourishment to each part of your body. And then that will give you more nourishment to your brain, which will give more support for you to be able to foster and nurture good thoughts and good feelings, all right? But at the end of the day, you can create good thoughts and good feelings at any point in time. Nobody said that you had to get your blood flowing and get your momentum going. It's just that that is going to help to foster and nurture those thoughts and those feelings, all right? So, if you've been here on my channel before, I'm a big advocate for self-gaslighting. You know what I mean? If something's going wrong in your life, acknowledge, yeah, something's not going great. I do not like this experience, but I'm going to gaslight myself and tell myself whatever the fuck I want to believe because I don't give a fuck about what the experience shows me. I don't give a fuck about what the external shows me. All right. I give a fuck about what I want to experience myself. Okay. So we all have a choice in that moment. What do you want to experience? Okay. Choose that experience. Align with that experience. All right. So getting into the topic of the video, as we were just rambling, as myself and myselves were just rambling and going on and on and on. I want to talk about how English is toxic to the mind. Now, a lot of people will be like, English is toxic to the mind. A lot of people will be like, oh, yes, I see what you're saying. I already know where you're going with this, all right? And maybe, there's only a few routes you can go with this kind of topic. Some people will be English dick suckers, so they love to suck the dick of Britain. They love to suck dicks of people who created this language, the forefathers of this language. And especially if you don't know anything other than English, of course you're going to be thinking that it's the best. You know what I mean? Of course. Because that's also part of the reason why English is toxic to the mind. Because it encourages ego. It encourages separateness. It encourages separatism, all right? It encourages biases, okay? Because when it comes to the way that English is formed, all right, first of all, we need to understand how language is formed in the first place, okay? And language is formed by culture, by history, by tradition, by ways of life, okay, which is tied into culture, all right? And when we look at the culture that English comes from, okay, you need to understand, first of all, English is actually a pidgin language, all right? You can actually look it up, because if you search up on Google, you can search up, is English a pidgin language? And it'll say, no, English is not a pidgin language. But if you search up what the definition of a pidgin language is, the examples that it will give you is like English. All right. So Google doesn't even know what the fuck it's talking about, but you can search that up right now and you can find out that Google will tell you that English is not a pidgin language. But if you search out what is a pidgin language, you'll be able to see that a pidgin language is English. And actually, that's one of the first pidgin languages. But beyond that, if you want to get lost into the whole hypothesis and the whole idea that English was originated from England, which would discredit or what is it called? Which would completely eradicate the fact that pidgin languages are formed from two different cultures or two different languages coming together in order to form one language. So in order for English to be a pidgin language, it kind of originated in England, first of all. But beyond that, you have to understand that pidgin languages are formed from two different languages and cultures, which was Native American languages and cultures and English language, or England's language, should I say, because English itself was not England's language. They were speaking something like German or Latin or whatever the heck, which is why they'll tell you even today that English is a branch of the Germanic languages, okay? And it's also tied in with Latin, okay? So it's a mix between Germanic, Latin, and Native American languages. And then other languages kind of put in there over time as they've started to colonize other countries and cultures, all right? Which is also why it was a language that was used to colonize, because it was a language based on colonization. It was a language grown from colonization, all right? But beyond that, you need to understand, okay, well, first of all, the culture and the history of English is based on colonization, taking over other people's countries, stealing words from other countries and cultures, which is why there's so many loan words. This is why you have so many loan words from other languages into English, all right? All the way down to words like chief, tribe. Those are loan words from Native American languages, all right? All the way down to words like mana, used in now video games to describe how your power is, which is a small form of loan word. But then you have also words like taboo, which is coming from Maori, which originates from the Maori word tapu, which was a word that was used to describe things that were either forbidden or sacred, all right? So it could be one or the other, depending on the context of the situation, okay? So certain things that were deemed tapu, you were not allowed to interact with those things due to the sacredness or the forbiddenness of said thing. Whether it was could even be a topic that you were talking about, could be an object that was tapu, it could be a person even could be considered tapu in a certain context or situation. But then you could also take away or lift tapu, which is a power that was more deemed for women, all right? Not to say that women can't be tapu, but women, because women are part of the receiving energy, all right? Women are, in Maori, we call it noa, right? So you have noa, which is representative of something that is normal. And now I'm starting to think, I'm just coming up with this now. Now I'm starting to think that normal actually comes from the word noa, okay? Because noa is actually used to represent something that is ordinary or something that is non-sacred, okay? So women naturally carry this energy of being noa, okay? Which is not to say that women cannot be tapu or non-ordinary, but it's due to the fact that women are tied to the feminine energy. They're tied to the receiving kind of energy, okay? And this is allowing them to kind of nullify something, or giving them the ability to kind of cancel out something, all right? If you think of like positive and negative, positive charge is externalizing, negative charge is receiving or internalizing, all right? But then if you look at that in a more expanded form, when you're tying it to tapu and noa, tapu is externalizing, aka externalizing a sense of not being able to go near that thing. And then noa is internalizing, aka internalizing a sense of being able to go towards that thing, being able to initiate, being able to, you know what I mean? So it's like relating to that positive, negative, masculine, feminine. Okay, that's why women can lift tapu, okay, in Māori culture. But when it comes to these like things, you need to understand that English is based on something that is based in a concept of being toxic, okay? Because when the English or the British came and they tried to take over other countries, they wanted to use pidgin languages like English to create a way to interact and communicate with the people, which obviously doesn't start off as negative. It doesn't start off as toxic. But if language is shaped by culture and history, and if we know that the history behind the Britain taking over other countries, even though it may not have started off as toxic, it developed into something toxic, then we can also assume or come to the conclusion that the language that was developed over those times due to them colonizing also was developed alongside them developing those toxic ways of being and toxic concepts and perspectives while trying to colonize and take over other countries and eradicate other peoples and cultures. All right. So, and this is just for educational purposes at the end of the day. This is so we can expand and we can grow. All right. This is not to attack or to say that we, one is better or worse than the other, which ideally, people can develop their own languages and their own concept off this. But you have to also understand that the basis or the root seed of something will eventually grow into something toxic. So even if something didn't start off as toxic, it developed into something toxic eventually. You know what I mean? So, for example, like this is kind of like vague or bad. It might be a bad example. But for example, you may have a toxic plant, right? That plant itself is considered toxic, but the seed of that plant may not be toxic by itself. Eventually, though, you know that that plant is going to grow into something toxic that you can't eat or consume. Okay? And so we know to stay away from said plant because it's not safe. So when it comes to, if you look at English as a plant, okay, it may have started off in the seed as something that was non-toxic, but eventually it grew into something toxic. And so therefore we can base that concept or we can give the concept or the idea that the seed itself will eventually grow into something toxic, regardless of if the intention of the seed was planted with good intentions, it grew into something toxic. So we need to plant a whole new seed in order to develop something that's more fruitful. All right. So when it comes to other languages like Māori or Native American languages, other languages that may be based on different premises and different concepts, which is more in tune with the land, which is more in tune with community, unity, togetherness, all right, working together. These things are more fruitful, okay, which is why even people get the idea to come to another land and integrate with the people of that land and try to eradicate their culture in the first place, because that comes from a jealous space. That comes from a space of, okay, your culture, your language, the way you live is more fruitful and my culture is not so fruitful. So how can these people take power or become supplant. I'm pretty sure they call it supplanting, right? Which is where you overtake something, you take the throne of something, all right? You dethrone something and try to take the position of power yourself. So in order to supplant said thing, it's necessary for you to take that thing out, because you can't actually create something that naturally supersedes that. Okay. So by you having to take it out, you already know deep down that you can't naturally supersede that. Okay. So it comes from a place of lack. It comes from a place of jealousy. It comes from a place of not having the ability to be able to create something substantial that other people would actually follow or other people would actually abide by. Okay. So when it comes to English being toxic, you have to look at the concepts and the basis of English, like I was saying at the start of the video, how it is based on a more separatist mindset, all right? Separating yourself from nature, disconnecting yourself from the people around you, being more individualistic. And none of these things are necessarily bad by themselves, but when they are the main focus of the language and they are the main focus of the way that you're thinking and your perspective and your worldview, this is where it becomes bad. Because we already know now people are facing concepts and difficulties with even reconnecting to nature, which leads people to feel like they need to go to nature to recharge, to blah, blah, blah. This is all coming from the root seed of the perspective and the worldview that we're brought up in, hence English. Okay? And when it comes to other cultures and other languages that are based in more that are based in being more in tune with nature, wow, how interesting. Just as I was going in and really getting into the nitty gritty, that's when my shit cuts out. Very, very interesting. Even though my internet's kind of trash, so it could be my internet. However, my internet had perfectly fine bars before. Now all of a sudden it cuts out. But anyways, like I was saying, being more in tune with nature and being more aligned with nature, obviously this is going to give you a better sense of connectiveness and also give you the ability to be able to be more consciously aware of how you're exploiting certain things within said nature. Okay. So all of these concepts are very, very foreign or not as common in languages like Maori or languages like the Native American languages, because they're more focused on sustainability, on especially oral tradition, being able to pass things down along generations, and are more spiritually based in general, okay, as opposed to English, which is more logical based. And neither is better or worse than the other. You need logic and you need the feminine, or the spiritual aspect, which spiritual is not necessarily feminine, but it can be related to feminine energy. Okay, not to get people twisted. Women may watch this and be like, "Oh yes, I'm more spiritual because I'm a woman." No, you may be just as fucked and flunked out as a man, or even worse. Just because you're a woman does not necessarily mean that you are naturally spiritual. It goes back to that concept that I was talking about. Bro, had to come inside because the connection is not connectioning. So it goes back to that concept that I was talking about at the start of the video with Noa and Tapu. All right, Tapu is obviously more inherently tied to like a, what's it called, sacred or forbidden. Okay, so you can think that of that as more spiritual based. All right, and then Noa is more ordinary. All right. Anyways, when it comes to, like I was saying, at the start, or just before, sorry, not at the start. Oh, fuck. Excuse me, guys. Just getting comfortable. My leg's a little bit sore, my knee. So, it's been sitting in weird positions, lying down, and, you get so hyper focused on something because you're just so in the moment, and you start to forget, oh, my body is like in this position, my leg is in this position. And then you move your leg very slightly, and you're like, holy shit, my leg's been in the worst position ever. And then you realize to be more conscious of your leg. But I guess that's pretty good because it shows that I'm in a more peaceful state of being. All right, I'm not so attached to my body either. But anyways, when it comes to, let me try and backtrack where I was even talking about before. Yeah, when it comes to these languages, all right, you have to compare and contrast what they're based on, and also the lived experience of the people who are constantly in practice with that language. All right. And we see in Western countries, people freaking struggling with mental illness on a constant basis. We see in Western countries, people always trying to get back in tune with nature. People always wanting to tune themselves with nature, regardless of how disconnected they are in some way, shape, or form. They're trying to get in tune with nature because deep down, your spirit knows, you know what I mean? Which is why a lot of people will even go and turn to cultures like Native American people or Maori to try and heal themselves or reconnect themselves to a more balanced or harmonious mindset, because those things are more natural to people who are raised with more of a mindset which is similar to those cultures and those languages, as opposed to when you're raised up under English and so on and so forth. It leads to like things being more toxic to your mindset. All right. So, you have to look at things as like for what they are, because people will be like, oh, well, that's conflating. You can't say that English is necessarily toxic to the mind, but you have to look at like, patterns and what is being exhibited within a society as a whole. All right. So a lot of the problems that people will see and say, oh, humanity is this, humanity is that. They'd like to say that humanity is like a virus, humanity is like toxic, but humanity is only toxic due to the culture, the history, and the languages that you're raised up with. All right. So if you think that humanity is toxic, you need to check your culture, you need to check your history, you need to check your language. And a lot of history has been erased, a lot of languages have been erased by the shadow government. So even beyond English, if you don't even speak English as your first language, but you still feel like these concepts that I'm talking about are still exhibited within your culture and your language, okay, that shows where the original basis of that language is. And therefore, that shows that you've been raised in a toxic mindset as well. You know what I mean? So, this is why I reference Maori and Native American as the main references of being more in tune with nature, because those are what I know most, but also I know that a lot of other cultures around the world are not as in tune or connected to that natural state of being. And even if you don't know any of those languages, you can still be more attuned or connected to those natural ways of living and those natural energies that I'm talking about right now. But that also will show where your spirit comes from, where your like oral traditions are from. Even if you don't know your culture or your language, your oral tradition is more based in the concepts and the ideas and the ways of living that I'm talking about, which is probably why you're even drawn to my channel in the first place. Because even myself, I wasn't raised knowing Māori, but knowing how I am, how I'm thinking, and all that kind of stuff, now I'm starting to see my own oral tradition, the way that I'm thinking, the way that I'm acting, the way that I'm being, is more in tune with the natural order of things, even when I was disconnected, but now I'm starting to become more reconnected. I'm starting to notice the patterns more and more and being able to break it down on a more specific level. Okay? So, when it comes to, what's it called? When it comes to the way that we're raised, and the way that things are, you have to understand that all of it's tied together. All of it's connected in some way, shape, or form. So it's not to say that, people are just struggling with mental illness and that's that. No, the systems, the language, the culture, and the mental illness all comes together to create a whole picture. And it exhibits, it shows you what is being observed, okay? And a lot of people will argue and say that, this culture did this and this culture did that, that's how, but that's all shadow government white man talk. They want you to think that certain cultures did that because that's what their culture did. Everybody's self-reflecting. You need to remember this, you know what I mean? So when it comes to you looking at history through the lens of white man, that's their lens, their perspective. Okay, so when they explain things to be in a specific way, you need to understand that we're all self-reflecting in some way, shape, or form. All right? And if you don't know that, especially people who don't know that we're all self-reflecting, they're going to be self-reflecting more on a deeper level. All right? As opposed to if you do know, you're a little bit more broader, and so you're able to self-reflect in a more healthy way. But when white man tries to teach us history, they'll only teach it from their own perspective, from their own ability to be able to self-reflect and look at themselves, okay? So when they're looking at other cultures and saying they did this and they did that, they're looking at themselves. They're looking at what they're doing, okay? And justifying their own ability to be able to do that by saying that other people are doing it. Because if you actually learn about those cultures and languages, you'll actually start to see that none of those things are actually true. White man will convince you all the time about how Māori and Native American people were constantly at war, constantly fighting, constantly disagreeing, blah, blah, blah. But that's because that's what they do. They're constantly at war. They're constantly fighting. They're constantly disagreeing. If you look at our language, then you'll be able to see that those things are not actually the main focus of the language. And when you're speaking a certain language and you have a certain tongue, you also have a certain mindset and you have a certain perspective, all right? So if you understand the language, you'll be able to understand the mindset on a deeper level and understand that a lot of the history that white man teaches is not actually true. It's actually based on their own perspective and their own language and their own culture, okay? So this is why it's important to do your own research, especially if you have a language to go back to. It's important to learn the language because you'll be able to understand the culture and the tradition from the actual true perspective as opposed to reading it through white man's perspective, which is false. It's all false. When white man talks, when shadow government talk, false, false, false. They only know how to speak lies. They don't know how to see things from a true perspective. Otherwise, we would have a better society today if they were really seeing things from a true perspective, from a balanced perspective. But the fact that our society is so fucked up, our system is so fucked up, it shows you where they're at mentally for them to raise up and contribute to a government and a society which is so toxic. All right? So, yeah, when it comes to this, English is toxic to the mind. It's toxic to the way that you're thinking. It's toxic to your own perspective. And it's not allowing you to be able to see things from a more harmonious and in tune with nature perspective. And it's restricting people and getting people lost into ego, which is why it's so based on individualism, individualistic mentalities, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really keeping people trapped into a perspective and a mindset that isn't necessarily true. And this is why even words and languages and stuff, people will say they're spells, but it's also on a deeper level where they're shaping the way that you're perceiving the world. But if your mind and your perspective is from a different space, then you're easily able to like develop another way of seeing things and develop another perspective. And then some people will say, oh, well, but there's certain things in English that also talk about non-individualistic perspectives, non-separate perspectives. All right, but yeah, that may be true, but that's not the main basis and that's not the main focus of the language. And still, like I said, English is a pidgin language. So anything that's based on other concepts that are not the main center focus of that language can be attributed to them being loan words, them being taken from other languages, other cultures. Because you also need to look at the history of Europe as well, itself as a whole. And Europe itself as a whole, we see things being exhibited such as torture. We see things being exhibited such as, look at medieval times. Look at the way that the Britain ran things pre-colonization. Okay, it's torture, it's slavery, it's like all types of stuff that we don't necessarily agree with today, and we actually go against today. All right, so you need to look at it from that perspective too. A lot of the things that Europe did back in those days, nowadays we look at it and we frown upon those things. Okay, even Europeans frown upon that shit. Okay, but if you look at a lot of the things that Maori and Native American people did today, back in those days, we still look up to a lot of those things. There may be some concepts that we don't agree with, but keep in mind, that's what is it? What do they call it? The exception, not the rule. If you look at the main things and the main ways of living that they exhibit, or we exhibited back then, a lot of those things, people even today are still trying to go back to those things. Okay, so that shows you who was in a healthier mindset, who was in a healthier perspective, all right? It's not that, older times are necessarily inherently bad. It's that European culture itself was started from a seed of negativity, okay? So it only bred more negativity, as opposed to indigenous, native, people of the land culture. It was more based in a more positive space, a more healthy space, which is why people constantly find themselves trying to go back to it, even if they're not connected to that culture. Why people constantly find themselves wanting to reconnect to those energies and those ways of living and those perspectives. It all ties in to paint that picture and show you, oh, okay, the reason why people want to reconnect to that is because it was in a more healthy space. It's not what people think it is, where it's like, oh, well, they were just connected to more connected to nature. No, they were more connected to the natural way that things should be, period. Not just nature, the natural way and the natural order of things, period. All right, so people want to get reconnected to their natural state of being, period, which is what leads them to want to reconnect to those cultures and those ways of being and those perspectives. All right, so when you look at it from all these perspectives and all these points that I brought forth, English itself, the culture itself, Europe itself is based in a toxic perspective. It's based in a toxic mindset. Yeah, there are good things and yeah, there are bad things. We always need to look at things from an unbiased perspective, all right? There's some things that Europe brings that are positive. There's some things that other cultures bring that's negative, all right? But as a whole, we need to understand as a whole, on a broader perspective, what is more positive and what is more negative, and therefore we'll be able to compartmentalize and grab the things that we need to grab from each part and be able to create something better, all right? Or create something completely new. But either way, even if you're creating something completely new, it's still going to be based on a lot of the concepts that we were already doing as people of the land, as people who are more in tune and connected to the land, All right. So this is why low key, that is kind of better in a lot of ways. All right. But that's looking at it from an unbiased perspective and understanding that we can also attribute and take things positive and negative from each and take out things positive and negative from each, and be able to create something even better and come together in a more balanced perspective. But that also requires people to be able to look at things from an unbiased perspective and not get lost into biases and think, oh, we just need to completely eradicate this whole thing and completely go towards this whole thing. No, we just need to understand that some things are toxic and some things are not toxic. And if we're living in a language and a perspective and a worldview that is based in toxic energies, okay, there it is. We need to eliminate and eradicate that worldview and that perspective. And therefore, we'll be able to create better languages, better cultures, and better histories. And then we won't be so fucked up mentally. So it all starts with the mind. Again, it always ties back to the mind, no matter which way you look at it, no matter which perspective you come from. All right. I think this is enough for this video, and I will leave it at that. I hope you guys have a beautiful time wherever you are. And if you ain't, make it better. Make your shit better, all right? So, peace, Mystar out. Kia taunga mana ki tanga te mea ngaro. Ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia te hoa mā kihi. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Kia tuturu, kia whakamaua, kia tina. Haumie, huie, tāikie. Remember to stay in tune with the more healthy mindset and a more natural way of being.